Tony Iommi, welcome back to Planet Rock.
Thank you.
It's absolutely wonderful to have you back on Planet Rock, because there are very few people that we talk to on this station that have had such an influence on, let's face it, the very foundations that the station is built on. I mean, you even had your own show here, I'm going to say maybe 12 years ago?
It must be, mustn't it? Yeah.
With Black Sunday, when I sat in the background.
No, it was great. I enjoyed doing that. It's, it was a hard work for me because I'd never really done it before, but I enjoyed doing the show.
It was just another string to your bow, because, you know, obviously we know you so well from Sabbath to your solo work to your other collaborations, but who knew you could talk? Well, we'll get onto all that a little bit later on, Tony, and also onto your new project, because thank goodness we've got some new music from you. But what I want to do is go right back to the beginning. Remind us how, as a young lad, how did you first come across a guitar?
Really, I wanted to be a drummer initially, but of course the house I lived in was very tiny, and there's no way my parents would buy me a kit of drums, and I'd have nowhere to put them for a start. So I sort of took to guitar, and I really enjoyed the thought of having a guitar, and I could go and sit in the bedroom and just practice and play. I sort of got into it through rock and roll, I suppose, you know, and listening to Chuck Berry and all the old rockers. What got me involved was the Shadows, really, because they were an instrumental band, and I could actually learn to play the instrumentals as opposed to vocal tracks.
I remember once Rick Parfitt, obviously sadly missed, but Rick Parfitt from Status Quo once doing an interview on Planet Rock, and he was talking about being successful in Quo, and he'd sat next to Hank Marvin at an event, and he said he couldn't stop staring at his hands, because he was like, they were the hands, you know, they were the sacred hands that had started his love of it. Do you feel a bit like that about Hank?
Well, when I first met Hank Marvin was quite a few years ago, and I met him in an airport, actually. He was getting a guitar out of his trunk, and I bumped into him then, and I thought, God, it's Hank Marvin. So it was a bit sort of in awe, because I'd never met him before. And I think I did some kind of video link with him in Australia, and I was playing with Skunk Baxter at the time, and Skunk Baxter was doing this show, and I think we hooked up and played some instrumental. I can't remember now.
Was there a particular Shadows track that you liked?
I liked 90% of them, to be honest. I liked Wonderful Land and Apache. In fact, I did a version of Wonderful Land for Mars Copeland. We did Wonderful Land with Bev Bevan on drums and Don Airy on keyboards, Gordon Giltrap playing sort of acoustic guitar, and Neil Murray, and it was good with our own version of Wonder.
I certainly think that the way you felt about Hank Marvin and the Shadows as a kid, I'm sure there's hundreds of thousands of kids literally sat in bedrooms now thinking, if only I could play like Tony Iommi. As you know, that gets passed on from generation to generation. How long did it take you, though, to sort of become the teenager sitting in his bedroom actually thinking, I could make this work? I could be, you know, maybe I could be a guitarist?
I'm still trying, actually. But no, I don't remember how long it took me, but I just used to sit in the bedroom a lot and try and learn to play it. I think the first gig I ever did was with a piano and drums in a pub, and I wasn't old enough, to be fair, to be in the pub, but they asked me if I'd play with them for this night, and I had the faintest idea what I was doing, but somehow I got away with it.
I mean, it must have been a fairly exciting, well, I guess I'm sort of projecting my own ideas on it here, but to me, that period in the sort of mid-60s, especially in the Midlands, you know, in Birmingham, there just seems to have been so many bands like yourselves, kind of just, you know, the roots of them kind of just coming together, people feeling their way around. You know, you had Robert Plant over on one side, and you mentioned Bev Bevan. Did it feel exciting at the time, or did it feel like there was something beginning?
Yeah, I mean, it was a good little scene in Birmingham at the time. There was, as you say, The Move and the Band of Joy, which was Robert Plant's sort of band, and John Bonham, And I used to see John regularly every few weeks because we used to do an alternate week at this, I don't even know what to call it. It was just a venue, a small venue. And every other week in between, there was another band. And quite often enough, John Bonham was in the band that was on because it'd last about a week and then they'd fire him because he was too loud. We turn up again and he'd be in another band.
I'm just going to go back to the beginnings of Sabbath. It took a few years, didn't it, after you started playing with Bill? And then was it Ozzy who put an ad in somewhere? Ozzy Zig looking for gig, was it?
Yeah, we went to the music shop looking for a singer and we saw this advert, Ozzy Zig requires gig. And I said to Bill, I know an Ozzy from school. I said, but it can't be him because I never knew he even sang or anything. So sure enough, we go round to Ozzy's and his mum answered the door and said, John, it's for you. And he come walking up the hall and I saw him. I said to Bill, forget it. I know him. Because I didn't know for a minute that Ozzy could sing. I just thought it was a bit of a joke, by him putting it in. So basically we talked to Ozzy for a bit and then left. And Bill said, what was wrong? I said, well, I used to go, he was at the same school as me. And as far as I know, I'd never heard of him singing. I said, so I think it was a bit of a wind-up. And then a few days later, Ozzy came round with Geezer to my house looking for a drummer. Bill was there at the time, and I said, well, Bill was the drummer. So basically we said, okay, let's have a go. And that's what we did. We decided to have a go and see what happened. And it was horrendous. It was just such a racket. And we had this gig. Bill and I got some of the gigs because from where we were up in North, we were quite big with that band. They were quite well known. So I talked to the promoter who was up there, and it was a woman, and she said, yes, okay, well, we'll give you a go. So I said to the others, we can get some gigs up there. So we did. Off we go in the van up there. And she said, you are playing some pop songs. Oh, yeah. I mean, we weren't. We were doing sort of 12-bar blues, really. But he really come on, Ozzy. He really got, and Geezer come on great playing bass because he'd never played bass before. And he was a guitar player, really.
You were playing covers. How long did it take you before you thought, hang on a minute, we can write better than this?
We were doing these blues clubs, and I think it was a time when we played with Jethro Tull, and at the time Mick Abrams was leaving, or they were firing him. It was a bit of a commotion on stage. They were passing notes to each other, abuse, I think. Anyway, after the show, they asked if I'd be interested in joining them. I went, I'm already in the band. I said, I know, but would you be interested in joining Jethro Tull? I went, God, I don't know. I've got to talk to my band. So on the way home, I said to the band, I said, look, they've asked me if I'd be interested in joining them. They said, oh, you should go for it. I went, oh, thanks very much. Trying to get rid of me then now. So anyway, that's sort of how that started. And I did some filming with Jethro Tull, but it really wasn't for me at that time.
Didn't you do the Rock and Roll Circus with them?
I did the Rock and Roll Circus, yeah, the Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which for me was brilliant because I'd come from our band to suddenly meeting every idol you could probably meet. John Lennon was in the film, and The Who, Taj Mahal, and us with Jethro Tull. It was just another world. Anyway, the guy that came down with me as well, one of the roadie chaps we had, we were having lunch. We had a break in the movie. It was chicken and stuff, and John Lennon had somebody gave John Lennon a plate of chicken. Of course, he was a vegan. And so he gave it to the guy that works for me, and he was starstruck. He went, oh, I've got John Lennon's chicken. It was like, oh, God.
It must have been an amazing sort of, not an epiphany, then maybe that's a too strong a word, but once you realise that, once you've been with Jethro Tull and thought, okay, they kind of have a work ethic.
It did. It taught me a lot because I saw how they worked, and I took that back to our band and said, look, this is what we need to do. And they must have thought I was mad, but they did it. And Geezer never saw the light of day till 12 o'clock normally. But I said, no, we've got to rehearse at 9 o'clock. So I'd go round to his house, pick him up, and just got out of bed. Anyway, we get down to rehearsal, and it started working, and we started doing it as a serious thing. We wanted to, so if we want, and because I'd had the chance of being with Jethro Tull and didn't do it, our guys were even more grateful of it all. And it just sort of worked then.
The influence that first album has had on an entire genre, it can't be underestimated, really. I mean, that was largely down to you and what you did with the guitar and the way you tuned it. I don't want to dwell on your accident, but that was kind of why you had to retune the guitar, wasn't it?
Absolutely. As soon as I had my accident, that changed my life completely, because I was told by so many doctors that I wouldn't be able to play again, just forget about it, and like it was nothing. And I said, well, I really want to do it. Well, you'll have to take up another job. But I really wanted to do it, and I thought there's got to be a way I can learn to play, to carry on. And one of the chaps from when I had my accident brought me a record round of Django Reinhardt, put it on, and I went, yeah, it's really great. And then he told me the story of Django Reinhardt, where he plays with just two fingers. And it really sort of inspired me to carry on. So I started making my own tips. So I made my own out of a fairy liquid bottle and melted it down and made it into a ball, and sat there with a soldering iron, hot soldering iron, making a hole in it that fit the finger. And then would sit there for how long, weeks, rubbing it down to shape like a finger. And it being plastic, of course, would slip off the string, so I had to find the material that would grip the string, which turned out, after I tried various things, to be a leather from one of my old jackets. And it worked. And funny enough, I've still got bits of leather from that jacket all them years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it was a complete jacket.
little squares taken out.
So, and it worked, and it done the job. So then I had to just learn to play with them, which wasn't easy. I mean, it was because you couldn't feel anything, and it was a big lump on your end of your finger.
The mechanisms of how that worked with your fingers had an effect on basically how you had to sort out the guitar to make it comfortable to play.
Absolutely. I had to rethink the whole thing with the guitar, and I'd strip the guitar down and file the frets down, make it as most playable for me. Most other guitar players would pick it up and go, oh, that's horrible. But I had to make it work for me. I wanted to come up with an idea for the strings. And you couldn't go and buy a light gauge set of strings then. In them days, they didn't have them. So I made my own setup, and I used banjo strings as the first strings, and then dropped it down a stage so the strings would be a lot more comfortable for me. It didn't hurt my fingers as much. So it was a whole process of going through from start to finish, changing the guitar.
And of course, Bill's drumming that is only Bill, Ozzy's voice that is only Ozzy, and Geezer's bass and Geezer's lyrics as well that are only Geezer. All that came together perfectly. And if it hadn't, it wouldn't be Black Sabbath.
No, absolutely. Everybody it just gelled, with the band and what Ozzy was singing and what Geezer was playing. As I say, Geezer had never played bass before and became like one of the best bass players around. And Ozzy, he'd got a unique voice, and it all just worked. And Bill also had an unorthodox style of playing. Bill never used a full set of sticks, because he in the days before Sabbath, when we used to do gigs with the band before, Bill couldn't afford to have drumsticks, so there'd be a band on with us, or we'd be on with another band, and Bill would wait till they'd broken a stick, and he'd go and get the half of the stick that they'd broken, which they'd thrown away. And of course, Bill learned to play with these half sticks. So it was sort of fascinating, really, and it took him years before he ever got round to be able to proper full stick.
I think I'm right in saying, I'm not sure if it was the first one, but the second Sabbath album, Paranoid, was it that one that was recorded in a 12-hour session, just straight through, or was it the first one?
Well, both of them were recorded very quick. The first album was recorded in one day and then mixed the next day. Paranoid took a little longer. It probably took a couple of days, 3 days or something like that. But that was very quick as well. And also in Paranoid, we didn't have enough songs to do the album. So we're in the studio, and the producer who we had then, had never done, I don't think he'd ever produced before, but we were like the first act he'd done. He said, you've got these songs here, which are great. He said, but you haven't got enough songs for the album. And here we are in the studio to record the album. I said, oh no. He said, well, can you come up with another one? I said, what now? He said, well, yeah, we're only in there for a day or so in this studio. So everybody gone out for lunch, the rest of the guys. So I stayed in the studio and came up with Paranoid, the riff, and waited for them to come back. When I said, well, we need another song. And they went, oh, no. I said, yeah, but I've got this idea. And it's Paranoid, and played them. And they went, yeah. And we'd done it as fast as we put it down. We recorded it and that was it. But basically, Paranoid was a filler. It was done as a filler. We weren't, we'd never done a 3-minute song before. So it was just to fill in. It's amazing what that track did.
Again, though, it's just like, it's like that funny aligning of the planets. It wasn't what it was meant to be, but what it became is what it should have been.
The only thing in them days for us was with Paranoid was it attracted a different audience to what we were used to. And we started getting like screaming girls and things, which was really unusual for us to have at a gig. And we were doing Top of the Pops and stuff like that, which we'd done Top of the Pops and we said, that's it. We're never going to do that again. We're not a pop band and whatever else. And we didn't until later, till we did Never Say Die. The thing was with Paranoid, at shows, as I say, it was attracting a different audience to what we were expecting. And people were coming to hear the band play who didn't know us. They'd only heard Paranoid and seen us on TV and thought, oh, we'll go and see them. And of course, then they'd hear Iron Man and all the rest of us. So, oh my God, what's all this?
Black Sabbath and the unmistakable Iron Man. This is a specially extended My Planet Rocks. I'm Liz Barnes, and we've got another hour with Tony Iommi on the way. Was it Volume 4? You produced that one, didn't? That was the first one you produced. So you kind of grew in terms of knowing how you wanted it all to sound rather than just how you wanted to play it.
Well, that was it. I mean, we decided to produce the stuff ourselves because only you know your sound, unless you've worked with anybody from start to finish. So we wanted to do it ourselves because the amount of times you're telling the engineer, no, I want it to sound like this, I want it to sound like that. So you might as well be in there anyway. So that's how it sort of worked. And I didn't particularly want to be in there all night and day like I ended up being, but that's how it was. I did enjoy it at a point until my first marriage fell quickly downhill because I'm in the studio all the time working and whatever else,
I mean, you guys really hurtled through the 70s with some incredible albums, but you also hurtled through the 70s sort of at a different pace because, I mean, you had a good time and went to America and then it all got a bit stressful. And of course...
That's one way of putting it.
I mean, we all know the story of how it ended up because by 1980, Ozzy wasn't there. So, you experienced some serious highs, career-wise and personally, but also some serious lows as well. So you kind of really learned how to be a rock star in the 70s, didn't you?
I suppose you did, but you never looked on yourself as that, really. We were never classed ourselves as rock stars, We were in it because we loved what we did and we enjoyed what we did. It weren't to go out and get we got to have the latest hairdo and all this business. It was, we really wanted to play our music, which we were proud of.
With the introduction of Ronnie on vocals, Sabbath sounded different. It had to change in some way. And of course, then you had Tony Martin, you had Ian Gillan, and then Ozzy came back round again.
Yeah, it's a weird story, the Sabbath story. It's really the amount of times we've had, like with Ozzy, he left, then he came back. With Ronnie, he left, came back. Tony Martin left, came back. Bill left, came back. Geezer left for a little bit, came back. It's been a funny old route round, over the years. But from Ozzy to Dio, when we had Dio, we realised that we had to really work hard at it again, which was great and what we wanted to do after Ozzy was because we knew we could go out and do stadiums and whatever, big venues anyway with us. And it sort of got a bit we're used to it. And so when it came that Ozzy went and we had to bring another singer in, it was, again, almost exciting but frightening, because we had to then get out and prove ourselves again. So bringing Ronnie in was a different move altogether. The songs became a different sound because the way we were writing for Ozzy, we were writing different with Ronnie. And that sort of worked. And it was good for us, I think, and good for Ozzy as well, because he had his solo career then, and he went off to do, great things.
As a musician, having learned to play with other singers, you've also collaborated outside of Sabbath as well. I mean, I'm going to skip forward quite a lot here, sort of from 1980, all the way up to 2000. But that solo album that you did was incredible. I mean, some of the tracks on there, just as your Sabbath work does, still stand up today. I mean, you collaborated with friends like Glenn Hughes, but you also collaborated with younger musicians like Skin from Skunk Anansie.
Yeah, and she was great. Skin was a fantastic voice. It was exciting and a bit daring for me, really, because I didn't know. I'd never really met some of them, and but it sort of worked using the Dave Grohl, and it was great. And Dave was really enthusiastic but it was a bit awkward as well, because the track Dave sang on, Dave said, "Can I play drums?" I said, "Well, I've already got a drummer on it," which was the drummer from Soundgarden. And Dave said, "Well, I'd like to play drums." I went, "Oh dear, no." So I left it to the producer. I said, "Dave wants to play drums on it." So anyway, Dave ended up playing drums on it as well. But it was a good experience, that, working with different people.
Talking about John Bonham earlier on, and the fact that you sort of grew up in a similar musical environment as him, he became one of your really good friends. In fact, such a good friend, he was your best man, wasn't he?
I know, that shows you, doesn't it? I see why my marriage went downhill. Yeah, he was my best man, and we used to go out to clubs, a lot, really, together. And he was another story. I mean, God, my stag night, we went out in Birmingham to different clubs. And the last club we ended up with, it was like sort of almost closing time, nearly 1:30 in the morning. And we walked in, and John Bonham said to the barman, 12 bottles of champagne on the bar. And he said, "Open them all," and poured them out, 12 of them. And I thought he was treating everybody in the club. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "That's for you." I said, "I'm not going to drink that." He said, "Come on, you got to drink it." He says, "You're getting married tomorrow." I said, "No." I said, "I'm not going to turn up if I drink that." So I had one glass, and he just went down the line drinking them. And he was paralytic. I had to take him home at the end of the night. We had the driver take him home, and then we got to his house, and his wife wouldn't let him in because he was drunk. And it was such an ordeal. And pressing the gate, "She's not coming in." And eventually she opened the gates, and we got in. And she opened the front door. She said, "He's not coming upstairs." I said, "Paz, I'm getting married in the morning. He's got to be there." She said, "Well, he could sleep downstairs." So I put him up against the radiator, and I said, "You're not going to turn up tomorrow, are you?" And he stuck his thumb up, like, "Yeah, And I said, "You're all right there?" And I left him. And sure enough, the next morning, bloody hell, I lived about 30 miles from him. And he turned up at my house before I'd even got up the next morning. I couldn't believe it. He was up and ready to go, his suit on and top hat and towels, everything. It was unbelievable.
Well, I mean, that just goes to show, they don't make them like that anymore.
They don't make them like that anymore.
In terms of Brian May, I know you guys have been really good friends for a long time, and I've heard both of you say, "Oh yeah, we should do something together one day." As far as I know, you haven't. Is that...
No. I mean, Brian and I have played together a lot on different things, projects, and of course I played with Queen at the Wembley thing.
Was that at Freddie's, and that was 1992?
Yeah. And we have threatened for years that we're going to do something together, but we've never got round to it at the moment. The last time we talked about it was Brian came over to my house just before the pandemic, and I played him some stuff, and he went, "Oh, great. He said, "You should just release it like that." I said, "No," I said, they're just demo ideas, And that was the last time we spoke about doing something together. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and everything's went pear-shaped. And he was supposed to be touring, so they had to cancel that. I was doing other stuff, I had to cancel that. So it got a bit went a bit out the window, really.
But you were a Queen fan, were you, in the 70s?
Yeah, I liked their first album. When I first heard the first album, I thought it was great, and the guitar playing was, and of course Brian had got an instant sound. which is very rare for me to have their own sound and come up with, you can recognise them straight away. And he's one of them guitar players who you could recognise straight away. You hear that first chord or first notes, and it's him, great player. And we hooked up a friendship in the early 70s. And he used to come around to the studio when I was doing stuff, and I'd go around when he was doing stuff. Freddie would be in the studio and then leave. And he'd phone me up, or I'd phone him, and he'd say, I'm in the studio, do you want to come round? And I'd pop round and sit there with him. And that's how we sort of hooked up a long-term friendship.
Tony, I could talk to you all day, but what we do need to talk about, though, is the stuff that you've been working on in your new material, because I know so many fans have been waiting to hear, new material from Tony. So tell us about Scent of Dark.
I'd got loads of different ideas, and Sergio, who's from Sergio, who's standing right here at the moment, by the way, asked me about doing a perfume, which was great. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I've never done anything like that before, and it was a great venture for me. And of course, and then talking to Sergio, and we built up a relationship, we really become good friends. And he got the same ideas as me. He loves music. He loves deeply all the things he does perfume-wise and with his business. He's got the same attitude as I have with music, with the perfume. It has to be right. And I saw that in him from the stuff he'd sent me, and it's just fantastic. I mean, it's such a top-notch product. And we struck up this friendship, and we did the perfume over a long period. He asked me to write down what smells I like, because I said to him, I've no idea how you'd start. He said, well, I do. So he said, sort of, write down all the things that you like the smell of, which I did. Some of the things, trying to think, what do I like the smell of? Leather, this, that, and the other. He'd done all the hard work. He made up all the different smells. And then he'd send them, and we'd try them and pick the best one of them. And then he'd send some more. When I tell him, I said, I like that one out the best. And then he'd make some more from that. And it went on like that till we found one that we really liked. It was great. But how Scent of Dark came up was, we were talking when Sergio came over, because he'd come back and forth from Italy to England. And he said about doing maybe some music for the track. And I thought, and that sort of sparked something else off. So I had some ideas, and I played him some ideas, and he liked the one that we used in the end. And then we made it into this 3-minute track to go with the perfume. And I'd got the basic riff, and then it gave me ideas for doing a bit more sort of evil riff in it, so I added that. And then we made it into this tune. And because Sergio also played guitar, and we've done this project all the way together from start to finish, it was great that he played on it as well. And so the whole thing has been together.
Do you feel kind of a personal responsibility when you're kind of curating that stuff? Because obviously there's 4 of you make up Black Sabbath, but because you've been doing this, do you feel like it's up to you to get it ready for kind of the next generation, I suppose?
Well, I suppose I've just done that for all the period, listening to the Sabbath stuff and being in the studio. That's not saying the others are not involved, 'cause they are. And they do listen to it. If they've got any comments, then we work it like that. If they say, or don't like it, then we don't do it.
Sabbath fans will kill me if I don't ask you, Tony, but is that really it?
Is that really it for Sabbath?
Yeah.
You can never say never, can you? We've known in this band, you can never say that's never going to happen again. Because every time we said that, it has. Like, we never thought we'd get back with Ozzy from the early days. Never thought we'd get back with Dio again. We did. We never thought we'd have Ian Gillan in the band, but we did. So, it's always been you just can't say it's never going to happen.
Because it felt very emotional, that last show. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there, but just watching it, I think because Sabbath never does really end, it felt quite emotional, because it was like, well, this can't actually be it. But you guys all still talk, right?
Yeah. I know it was emotional, the last show, because we'd done it so long together, and it just felt pretty weird, really. But it was basically my fault to end it because of the touring. The problem is, in a band of this size, you can't just go and do a week of gigs, and you've got to do a world tour of 18 months. And when you do that, you have to take that on. And when it was first mentioned, about going out on tour, yeah, great, brilliant, 18-month tour, oh, fantastic. But when you get into a year of it, you're getting tired, but you have to take it on that long because you got all the crew to keep alive, and everybody's got a job, so you can't do 1 week and then have a month off and do another week because you won't get the crew. They want to have a job. So we done it for that long and done the world tour and the world tour again, and then it was getting sort of tiring. Even though we had our own plane, we travelled the best hotels, everything was perfect, but you still get tired. And we'd have a base in New York when we play in that area, so we'd have the plane out flying. So you get in at 3:00 in the morning and then try and get to bed and sleep. So it was a regular thing like this. And as I say, we tried to make it as comfortable as possible. You couldn't have got it any easier, comfortable, but it still was tiring. And the late nights and stuff. So when I was talking to my doctors, they said, you shouldn't really be doing to that extent of flying. It's not, because I got blood cancer, it wasn't good for me to be doing that much flying. I talked to the guys, I said, it's probably the time to call it a day now, sort of thing, for now, of that extensive touring. And so that's really what we did. But the stipulation was we had to end up in Birmingham because that's where we started.
I think for me, as a Sabbath fan, and for the millions of Sabbath fans that are listening, maybe there's a glimmer of hope that one day we might get another one off, but we won't hold you to it because we've got...
May do. You never know. We haven't stopped it. It's just the major touring that has come to a stop. I wouldn't want to do 18 months tours again. But that doesn't say we wouldn't do any one-off stuff.
Well, on that cliffhanger, we can maybe save it for next time. But Tony, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you and to catch up and to have you back on Planet Rock again because, it's really all your fault.
Thanks